Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing.
Going Native, Chapter 24. Samuel smiled to himself as he watched Marin wake up. He had been sitting in the bedroom, reading an old sci-fi novel and keeping an eye on their large guest. Marin let out a long, drawn-out groan and rolled over, then tried to stand up from the mattress on the floor. She got about halfway up before she wobbled and fell back down into the pile of pillows and blankets. Samuel just couldn't help himself. He laughed. Marin turned, obviously startled by his presence. Her skin flushed even darker than its usual indigo and she covered her face with her hands in embarrassment. "Don't worry about it. The first time Sammy got their hands on me like that I didn't even get out of bed for 2 days. Granted, every time I tried they fucked me back into a coma. Hell of a weekend. I think we might have to revisit the what is Sammy question. Clearly they're not real." Marin let out a weak smile. Samuel sat his book aside and stood up, stretching his back before he approached the Shilvati sitting on the floor and offered a hand. "Let's get you up and into the shower." Honestly, she did seem to be handling this well. Once Sam got her up, she was barely bow-legged. He wrapped an arm around her waist and helped steady her. Her response was to put a hand on his head and idly play with his hair. The fingertips on his scalp were pleasant, and occasionally she'd close her hand tight, pulling his hair and causing an involuntary moan from the small man. They were halfway to the bathroom when Marin stopped. "I think I need a little more support than this," she remarked before putting her hands on Samuel's shoulders and pushing down. He got the message, and was soon on his knees in front of the large woman, her hands wrapped around his head as she guided his face against her crotch. This was going to be an interesting morning. The car that pulled into one of the inductive charging spaces in the Painter Planetarium's parking lot that afternoon was as nondescript a vehicle as Marin had ever seen. It was so plain that she felt like she couldn't describe it even when she was staring right at it. She supposed idly that that was probably the point. The man who stepped out of the vehicle was tall, wearing a long coat against the winter chill. His stride was confident as he made his way up the steps. Sammy opened the door for him, and squealed out "Dave," as they embraced him in a tight hug. This was followed by a handshake with Samuel that turned into a one-armed hug with a few back pats. The conversation started fast, but Marin couldn't make heads or tails of it. Her English was minimal at best, and figured it was best to wait on the sidelines. Maybe she wouldn't have to meet with this human at all. Then he turned and their eyes met. The man had pale skin and dark hair, the ragged mop on his head as well as his tightly cropped facial hair streaked with grey. His eyes were just as dark as his hair and seemed to bore into her. He was tall, towering over the two Sams, only a hand's length shorter than her. Marin didn't think of herself as much of a soldier, but she had been well trained in hand-to-hand combat by her parents and the military had only refined those skills. As the human turned to walk towards her, every alarm bell in Marin's head went off. His stride was slightly odd in a way that kept his center of balance perfectly aligned, hands slightly open to catch or deflect a blow. His eyes seemed to be looking everywhere, even as they stayed on her. Marin was completely certain of her instincts. This man was dangerous. Incredibly, terrifyingly dangerous. He stopped before her, face grave, and offered a fist to bump. His shill was perfect, but strangely unaccented. "Hello. People call me D.V." Sammy interrupted to yell, "Just call him Dave," from across the room. This elicited a small smile from the man. She cautiously returned the fist bump. Samuel filled me in on the broad strokes of your situation. You have my condolences on your loss. His frown seemed genuine. Losing family is always hard. Even worse when they are civilians and a conflict reaches out to them. You are looking for vengeance. Marin nodded slowly. May I offer you some advice? I know it is not my place. You may. The wariness was plain in Marin's voice. Who was this man? No matter how well you plan, the opportunity to balance the scales of justice never comes in the time and place of your choosing. If you wish to succeed, you must be ready at all times. That was unexpected. Marin was planning to deflect a platitude, defend her course of action. Instead, here was some practical advice. Thank you. I will take your advice to heart. He grinned, suddenly seeming far less dangerous. Now then, may I impose on you to help me unload my vehicle? The chill outside seemed to blast through Marin's coat and down to her bones. Both Sams were vibrating with the cold as they each carried a heavy flight case out of the trunk and up the stairs into the lobby. Marin grabbed the last two of the hard plastic cases before DV slung a bag over his back, then carefully and quietly closed the trunk. Every motion he made was deliberate and calculated. The cases were bulky, but Marin managed, and soon they were back in the lobby with 4 identical black rectangles arranged on the floor next to the canvas bag. DV started to say something to Samuel in English, but Sam made a comment and he restarted in Shil. These were not easy to get, and I was unable to get everything on your list, particularly Sammy's more unusual requests. To be honest, I was surprised to even get your message. After all this time, I figured you were out of the game. Besides, this was never your side of things. Samuel nodded. Hopefully we won't need any of it. We're in a bad situation here, Dave. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. I am sorry to hear that. I know how hard you tried to stay clear of everything, especially after he glanced at Marin. Unpleasantness. The tall man grabbed one of the identical-looking cases and inspected it before handing it over to Marin. Opening the case, her mouth dropped wide in astonishment. Standard issue Shilvati Marine Combat Armor, complete with helmet. She had expected some surplus human stuff, maybe even just a stab vest. She inspected it hesitantly, sure she would find a hole somewhere where the previous owner met her end by some insurgent sniper. Instead, she found something that left her relieved but also horrified in a very different way. The armor was brand new. It was even in her size. No serial number, no black box, but aside from that it looked perfect. While she stared, there was a click from another case. You will use these to protect my friends, yes. The second case was far more disturbing than the first. It contained 2 human pistols and ammunition, but much of the case was dominated by a huge, squat energy weapon. It was, again, brand new, and properly proportioned for a Shilvati female. It was also not a Shilvati weapon. The heavy weapon looked to be consortium built. How had it even made it onto this planet? Samuel reacted with a long, low whistle. That couldn't have been easy or cheap to get. The man nodded. I figure we are even. Samuel shook his head. No, I owe you for this. Name your price. DV thought for a minute. 2 favors of my choosing. No wet work. Deal. With that, the other cases were snapped open. 2 more sets of brand new combat armor, sized for small male Shilvati. They should fit both of the Sams without trouble. The bag contained knives, rope, and a bizarre assortment of miscellaneous items that Sammy apparently wanted. "Now then," DV said, theatrically brushing his hands together as if he was knocking the dust off of them, "I suppose I should be leaving." He reached into an interior coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to Samuel, then turned to Marin and offered another fist bump. "These two idiots are important to me. Can I trust you to take care of them?" It didn't feel like a threat, but his eyes were hard above his easy smile. "Of course. They're important to me too." D.V's smile grew more genuine and his eyes twinkled. "If you need something, Samuel knows how to contact me. Don't hesitate. My prices are very reasonable." With that, he laughed and made his way for the door. "Oh no you don't." Sammy's running hug nearly took the man out before he could make it 10 steps. "You're staying for dinner." Having Dave around, even for an evening, made Sammy happy. He was an incredibly dangerous man and utterly loyal to his friends. Friends like Samuel. It was easy to see how much more comfortable their husband was with him around. If it wasn't for the fact that he was probably wanted by the interior and the rest of them would be horribly tortured to reveal anything they knew about the strange man, Sammy would have invited him to stay on permanently. Not that he would if asked. Dave never stayed in one place long. Even spending dinner at the observatory was a concession to friendship. Sammy checked the dough that was proofing on the counter, listening with half an ear while Dave regaled Marin with stories. "So there I am, naked and handcuffed, running through the US Embassy looking for an exit. I turn a corner just in time to catch a computer keyboard right to the face." Dave made a swinging motion with his hands, adding some animation to his words. Samuel and Marin were both laughing along with the story. "Normally, a keyboard isn't much of a weapon, but I was running and, well, it was an old heavy thing. It was enough to knock me flat on my back. I look up, and who do I see but tiny little Samuel Forsyth, holding a broken half of a keyboard and trembling like a leaf in the wind. By then, security caught up and I was back in the cell." Sammy punched down the dough and started working it, stretching it again and again. These pizzas were going to be excellent, and they didn't mind not being there for the story. Sammy had heard it before. "So wait, Sam helped you get caught. How are you friends?" "This was our first meeting, but we worked together a few other times after this. Anyway, about 2 months later I'm in front of a judge, and who walks in as a witness but Samuel Forsyth in a cheap suit. It wasn't cheap. It was off the rack, which means it was a cheap suit." Samuel sighed. "I think we're getting off topic." "Right. So, Samuel goes up there and, slick as you please, explains how not only did I not try to blow up that embassy, but that nobody tried to blow it up. The explosion was caused by a propane gas leak and what they thought were parts of a clever detonator I supposedly built were actually pieces of an old gas flow monitoring system that had been decommissioned but never actually removed. Suddenly I'm not a terrorist, just an embassy employee being charged with resisting arrest because I tried to escape." "But didn't you say you were in there illegally?" Sammy turned to see Marin leaned forward, both elbows on the table and her chin in her hands like a child listening to a teacher read a story. It was cute, though Sammy was sure if they told Marin that the poor Shilvati would be mortified. "Oh yes. False ID and everything. I was there to steal some, well, it's not important. As soon as they released me on bail I vanished like a fart in the wind." Everyone had a chuckle at that, then Marin asked the obvious question. "So, Shouldn't this all be a secret? Dave shrugged. I mean, the governments we were both working for are pretty much gone. The secrets I stole are worth nothing now. Who are you going to tell? Finally, Sammy found the point to interrupt. All right, kids, it's build your own pizza time. Samuel lounged across the couch, his head in Marin's lap. Sammy was sitting next to her, cuddled up tight. He had been worried that after today, Marin would figure it was best to cut her losses and run. She hadn't, which he figured spoke a lot about either the quality of her character or her bull-headed stupidity. Maybe Sammy's natural charm had just gotten to her. It was nice to see Dave again. They had crossed paths a few times over the years, sometimes on the same side of the fence, sometimes opposite. Hitting him with an old IBM Model M was the closest he ever got to the sort of real spycraft that Dave did, and the two had laughed about it over drinks a few months later when they were both called in to work on a different project. With the late morning and Dave's visit, this whole day was pretty much shot. So, how are you paying D.V. Marin asked. The worry was clear in her voice, though she tried to hide it. Solar cells. Samuel looked up at Sammy's face, seeing the exact grin he expected. Why would he want solar cells? Samuel decided to jump in here. There are a lot of humans who are trying to hide from the Shilvati, go off the grid, live in the woods. They want solar cells for power, but Shilvati tech in that regard is so far advanced that nobody really wants human solar cells anymore. Marin nodded idly. Makes sense. Why don't they just buy Shilvati made then? Sammy answered, paranoia. They are afraid anything they can buy will have tracking chips or something in them. So instead, they can buy my solar cells, made by humans using stolen Shilvati tech, for a ridiculous markup. And you can make them using all the equipment that Celia got for you. Now everyone was smiling. I was afraid you were going to be making weapons or explosives or something. Sammy's perplexed face looked hilarious from Samuel's upside-down vantage point. I mean, I'm doing that too. But not for Dave. It took both Sams and a good 20 minutes to get Marin to calm down enough to actually listen to Sammy. The sheer panic at what she took as a confirmation of her worst fears were only assuaged when she looked over the designs. Sammy had been working on a new type of particle beam collimator, an evolution of the current tech being used in everything from pistols to battleships. Sammy had applied for a patent for the design, but was also working on some different ways to implement the technology. This particular implementation would be the size of a warship. It's like the wave motion gun. Blow a hole clean through a line of picket ships in one shot. I have no idea what you're talking about. Marin was confused. Sammy didn't seem like the violent sort, but here was a design for the sort of weapon that could permanently ruin a planet's biosphere with ease. Why would you design something like this? You know, for fun. I'm not going to actually build one. Sammy's face scrunched up. That would be, like, really bad. Samuel chimed in. If it makes you feel any better, you can't actually build one this size. It would bankrupt several planets, and I think a few of the weirder isotopes aren't actually available in large enough quantities in this part of the galaxy. It's more of a fun what-if project. That was gratifying to know. Dealing with the Sams was fun, but Marin was pretty sure she aged 20 years over the course of the day. She was conflicted about her meeting with DV, knowing that Samuel had that sort of connections, but if it turned out the pair of them were actually designing and building weapons for terrorists, well, She wouldn't know what to do. Here, check out the model. One pencil-white hole through the wall and a whole bunch of apologies later, Marin decided to confiscate the Yamato for safekeeping. It was a plastic model of some kind of boat, an actual watercraft, 50 centimeters long and extremely heavy for its size. It wasn't nearly as powerful as an actual pistol, but it was clearly dangerous. Between that, Samuel's shadow connections, the whole situation with Celia. Marin's protective instincts were in overdrive. You know, I think I have made a decision about the two of you. Oh. The two humans were staring up at her, holding hands adorably. In their little matching lab coats, it was hard to stay mad at them. I'm going to keep you both, if only so you don't end up accidentally killing yourselves.
End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff. Visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.